Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and war zones of the Warhammer 40k universe. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, I shall be regaling you with the events of Warzone Damocles. Now do be aware that there are many details I have left out, in the form of sidebars, etc. Hence, owning this book is the most optimal way of gaining the lore. This is merely for those who do not collect all of the lore books available. And I would also like to announce that Lightbringer and I are releasing our first extended episode of Living Mythology tonight. At nearly an hour of pure story, pure tale, we hope you will join us for this seminal moment, the birth and early use of the Greek god Zeus. Now, on to the war zone. And as I always say, to quote, Warzone Damocles, year 999, millennium 41. The Damocles Gulf, total war across the frontier. For more than 250 years, the region of space near the Damocles Gulf has been a source of bitter dispute between two empires, the indomitable Imperium of Mankind and that of the vigorous alien race known as the Tau. Despite an uneasy truce developing in the wake of the Damocles Crusade, war now rages anew as the Tau begin their next phase of conquest. A sector in flames. The imperial worlds beyond the Damocles Gulf were once again embroiled by war. Echoing their second phase expansion, more than 2 centuries earlier, the Tau Empire surged into imperial space on a sector-wide front. They offered mercy to worlds that welcomed the teachings of the greater good, but a swift death to those that opposed them. The Tau Empire was in ascendancy, and nothing, it seemed, could keep them from fulfilling their destiny. The Imperium, despite its impossibly numerous armies, was ill prepared to deal with the suddenness and strength of the Tau invasion. Many of the Imperial forces, once stationed to defend the Damocles Gulf, had been withdrawn to fight another, more pressing threat in the form of an encroaching Tyranid hive fleet. In this manner, the Tau offensive could not have been timed better, and they made swift progress deep into Imperial space. The Imperium's remaining armies were forced to retreat to their garrison worlds and fortify them as best they could. The rapidity of the Tau advance was abetted by many Imperial worlds that were sympathetic to the Tau's beliefs. The legacy of water-caste diplomats who had long been preparing the way for the Third Sphere expansion. So successful were these ambassadors that some worlds capitulated without even firing a shot, welcoming the Tau as saviors, not invaders. A new era of expansion. This new war against the Imperium began when, in the year 997, millennium 41, the Tau Empire launched its Third Sphere expansion. The revered leader of their race, the venerable Onvar, decreed that their strength was great enough to expand the borders of their burgeoning empire once more. Never before had the Tau wielded such military might, and the confidence of this ambitious race was at an all-time high. But their self-assurance was well justified, for the Tau Empire was as large and as powerful as it had ever been. Working as one for the greater good, the Tau Empire's entire population was placed on a total war footing. The Firecaste in its entirety prepared to set forth on great transports to distant battlefields. The Tau were further augmented by millions of alien auxiliaries that had already been subsumed into the Tau Empire, all ready to do their part in helping to expand its boundaries. Hundreds of expeditionary forces set out in every direction from the Tau Sept worlds, each explicitly tasked with the assimilation or subjugation of a chain of star systems deemed desirable by advanced scouts and long-distance surveillance drones. With all four castes working in precise harmony and driven ever onwards by their ethereal leaders, the Tau Empire expanded at an incredible rate. Within the first year, several potential Sept worlds had already been established, wrested from Orc warlords or other Xenos species, and colonized within weeks of conquest. But, inevitably, it was against the Imperium of Man that the Tau were to face their greatest challenge. Indeed, Onvar was well aware of the threat posed by mankind, for Imperial retaliation in the wake of the Tau's second sphere expansion had taught him much about the dangers of rousing this sleeping giant. The Firecaste had learned a fearful lesson during the bloody reprisals of the Imperium's Damocles crusade. So it was that Onvar chose to personally oversee the expeditionary force that was to force a passage into Imperial territory through the narrow route spanning the Damocles Gulf. Onvar would not be alone in his venture. At his side was the most brilliant military strategist of her time, Commander Shadowsun. Named as the replacement for the traitor Farsight, Shadowsun now bore the mantle of Supreme Commander of the Tau Fire Caste. Having earned much fame and renown for her actions against the Greenskins during the Great War of Confederation, Shadowsun was now a famous hero of the Tau Empire and a worthy successor to her mentor, the legendary Commander Puretide. Propelled at ever greater speeds by the latest Earth-cast impulse reactors, the vast armada of Onvar's Tau coalition powered across the Damocles Gulf and into Imperial space. The expeditionary force met little in the way of significant opposition, even from the Imperial worlds that rejected the offers of the Watercaste ambassadors. Despite their defiance, resistant worlds soon fell prey to Shadowsun's tactical genius and the dedication of her Firecaste warriors. Vastly outgunned by the pinnacle of Tau weapons technology and overmatched by the aerial dominance, the meager Imperial forces that defended these outlying planets offered little more than sport for Shadowsun's veterans of the Orc Wars. Spurred ever onwards by the ethereal Supreme at their head, world after world fell to the Tau in a series of precision strikes. Time and again, Shadowsun's rapid insertion forces, elite formations comprising multiple battlesuit teams, were deployed from low orbit to circumnavigate the hastily prepared defenses and annihilate the foe wholesale. The small mining world of Thelian IV was conquered in less than 12 hours by the relentless attacks of 100 hunter cadres. The densely populated hive world of Jorvax fell even faster. After witnessing the arrival of the overwhelming Tau forces, Planetary Governor Balsius IV called for his commanders to stand down, surrendering without a shot being fired. Even as the conquests of the planets beyond the Damocles Gulf continued in earnest, ambassadors from the Watercaste were making equally impressive gains. Their battlefield, however, was on the negotiating table, swaying the hearts and minds of disenfranchised populations and resentful planetary governors. Many of these worlds wasted no time in rejoining the Tau Empire, just as they had done during the Second Sphere expansion. However, as astropathic warnings and pleas for military aid gradually began to circulate around the Imperial worlds of the subsector, the persuasive methods of the Watercaste became increasingly ineffective. The further these emissaries of the greater good advanced into Imperial territory ahead of the Tau expeditionary forces, the more likely they were to be rebuffed or face persecution. When a Tau ambassadorial ship landed on the night world of Voltores, the Watercaste diplomats on board duly presented themselves at the gates of Furion Peak, towering stronghold of House Terrin. As the ruler of a knightly house, Patriarch Tybalt was honor-bound to invite the heralds in to present themselves and say their piece. He listened patiently as the alien orators span tales of peaceful relations between species and the harmony which the greater good would bring to an otherwise barbaric galaxy. But Tybalt knew that, behind their silky words, the Xenos ambassadors offered a simple choice. Give fealty to the Tau Empire, or be destroyed. The suggestion that Tybalt should betray his oath of loyalty was an insult to his honor, and when the Tau diplomats finished speaking, Tybalt rose to his feet and vehemently denounced them for their lies, banishing them from Volturis under pain of death. As the emissaries hastily left, the Patriarch roared a mighty oath that House Terran would oppose the impudent Xenos of the Tau Empire should they ever threaten the sovereignty of a world that belonged to the Emperor, a vow that cost the Tau dearly in the ensuing months. The gravity of the Tau expansion was not lost on the Imperial commanders of the Lithesh sector. Indeed, it was becoming increasingly evident that the Xenos forces were far greater in both number and strength than they had been during their Second Sphere expansion 2 centuries earlier. Slowly, inexorably, the Imperium began to gather its armies in response to the Tau threat, though it would still take time before a force large enough to counter the alien advance could be fully mustered. With the exception of a few swiftly mobilized vanguard formations, the Imperium's defenders were on their own. With memories of the overwhelming victories won at the outset of the Damocles Crusade fresh in their minds, the Imperium's commanders grossly underestimated the Tau. Their arrogance only served to leave the Emperor's armies further at the mercy of Shadowsun's finely honed military strategies. It was only when the first wave of Imperial reinforcements arrived that the Tau were forced to adapt the tactics that, thus far, had proven so efficient. So were the Imperium's embattled defenders bolstered, at the last, by the White Scar's 3rd Company, the Katajan's 2nd Green Vipers, and Patriarch Tybalt, at the head of 5 household detachments of his knights. The northernmost region beyond the Damocles Gulf was now fully under Tau control, and a number of new sept worlds were already being established in key systems. Further to the galactic west lay the mineral-rich Dovar system, the primary objective of Anvar's expeditionary force. With the Imperium's defenders having retracted to their most heavily defended worlds, protocols of engagement would normally have called for the Tau expeditionary force to circumnavigate the populous hive world of Agralan and concentrate on the more vulnerable planets beyond. However, the Dovar system's proximity to an impossible region of the Damocles Gulf meant that it was all but impossible for the Tau Armada to gain access to it without passing through Agralan's orbit. The hive world had to fall. To prepare for the unavoidable assault on Agralan, Commander Shadowsun cunningly distracted the other nearby human worlds to keep their defenders occupied. Hunter cadres fought hit-and-run skirmishes, supported by huge numbers of specialist DroneNet VX-10 formations. This shrewd use of expendable drones freed Shadowsun to muster the better part of her force to attack Agralan. As Shadowsun's armada powered towards Agralan, huge rents were torn in the fabric of reality as a handful of Imperial Navy vessels burst from the warp. With the Tau having revealed their next target, the Imperium's reinforcements were able to use the superior speed of their warp drives to get the jump on the Tau fleet. A ferocious space battle ensued, and though the small Imperial flotilla was hugely outmatched and soon forced to disengage, 3 vessels were able to slip away in the confusion and deliver their valuable cargo to the planet's surface. So did the White Scars, Catachans, and Imperial Knights arrive on Agralan just in time to face the Tau planetary assault. Agralan's orbital defenses, though formidable, could not withstand the might of the Tau fleet. In a few hours, their guns had been silenced by wave after wave of sleek Xenos fighters, and Agralan lay open to attack. But the planet's surface represented an entirely different challenge to the Tau expeditionary force. Each high city was defended by towering ferrocrete walls, bristling with colossal guns that covered carefully prepared killing zones. Beyond these mighty bulwarks lay entire fields of gravitic mines, designed to channel enemies into deadly crossfires. Even the planet itself was capable of killing the unwary. A virus bomb had long ago permanently scarred its surface in an Inquisition-sanctioned exterminatus, following a demon incursion that even the Ordo Malleus could not contain. However, in the aftermath of the virus bomb's deployment, a unique element in Agralan's atmosphere reacted unexpectedly with the fallout from the attack, creating an environment so toxic that it became incredibly hazardous to live outside of the rebuilt hive cities and their air reclamators. To make matters worse, the veil between reality and the warp remained incredibly thin in the aftermath of the demonic attack. Mutated flora and the taint of chaos were commonplace beyond the sanctuary of the wars. Such a history of violence had led the inhabitants of Agralan to heavily fortify their high cities, and the Inquisition had remained vigilant should the demons ever return. Into this crucible of hostility swept the Tau, their fearless commander the first to set foot on Agralan's surface. Shadowsun, ever the patient huntress, sought to test her enemies rather than waste the lives of her brave warriors in a bloody assault on the imposing defenses. Orbital scans had revealed the presence of a small force of the Imperium's deadly space marines, alongside a number of Imperial knights, against which the Firecast had not yet been tested. Shadowsun wanted to study this formidable new foe in battle, and, if the opportunity presented itself, destroy them before launching her main offensive on Agralan. In order to draw out and expose the knights, Shadowsun's formations probed the defenses of high cities across the planet's surface, stretching the Imperial forces to their limit. So effective were Shadowsun's hit-and-run tactics that, had it not been for the Herculean efforts of the White Scars, it is certain that the three high cities of the Acacian Basin would have fallen in spite of their great walls. In response, and in order to deny the White Scars their swiftest means of transportation, Shadowsun ordered Tau air superiority wings to hunt the White Scars' Thunderhawk gunships whenever they took to the skies. Only the noble sacrifice of their accompanying Storm Talon squadrons kept any of the invaluable Thunderhawks operational. With the Imperial forces woefully outmatched in the air, the White Scars commander, Khosaro Khan, was forced to deploy half his company's transports as an armoured vanguard to act as a mobile reserve. Meanwhile, Shadowsun positioned the majority of her heaviest weaponry around the capital hive, Agralan Prime, using a Kaon ploy to draw the Imperial Knights stationed there out into the open. Such tempting bait was too much for Patriarch Tybalt and the Knights of House Terran, and they duly sallied forth to engage their foe. However, the moment they left the city walls, the Knights were targeted by carefully concealed hammerhead interdiction and range support cadres. Scores of hyper-velocity railgun shots slammed home. The Tau were, as yet, unaware of the effectiveness of the Knights' ion shields, and only one succumbed to the fusillade. Within moments, the Knights were in amongst the Tau armor with devastating effect. Only the personal intervention of Shadowsun, at the head of a Firestrike Assault Hunter cadre, forced the Knights to withdraw. As the White Scars master of the hunt, Khosaro Khan had hunted and slain many powerful enemy warlords, returning to Chogoris with their heads amid great ceremony. In undertaking these quests, the Khan had become well versed in reading the tactics employed by his enemies in order to identify the presence of such a quarry. In Commander Shadowsun, he soon recognized a worthy foe. More specifically, a foe whose death would greatly undermine the Tau forces fighting on Agralan. So did the Khan swear a great oath to see her slain. Leaving the defense of Agralan to a war council led by Patriarch Tybalt and the Katajan Colonel Strachan, Khan led a bike-mounted demi-company to track down the Tau commander. As they roared off to wage war behind enemy lines, an optimized stealth group doing advanced reconnaissance, brought word of his change of tactics directly to Shadowsun. Forewarned against the threat posed by the White Scars that hunted her, Shadowsun reacted with her typical composure and tactical pragmatism. Rather than seeking refuge from her pursuers, she planned to use the dogged determination of the Space Marines, a trait which they had frequently displayed during the bitter fighting of the Damocles Crusade, against them. Though the White Scars caused great harm to the Tower infrastructure with their lightning raids, more often than not, they were unwittingly drawn towards battlefields of Shadowsun's choosing. In the battle for Blackshale Ridge, Shadowsun even offered herself as bait to provoke the White Scars into springing a trap. Surrounded on all sides and taking heavy fire, Khosrow Khan and his fellow White Scars would have been cut off and annihilated, were it not for the timely arrival of Landspeeder Stormbringer Squadron, which was able to punch an escape route through the encircling Tower army. Far from sitting idle and waiting for the White Scars to make their next move, Shadowsun had been working with Onvar, preparing to unleash her boldest action yet of the Third Sphere expansion. In order to prevent the war on Agralan from descending into a grinding stalemate, she intended to marshal her forces and launch a carefully orchestrated simultaneous attack against every hive on the planet. To combat the Imperial Knights, the attack on Agralan Prime would be spearheaded by the latest breakthrough in Earthcast technology, the XV-104 Riptide battlesuit. If Shadowsun's ambitious strategy worked, Agralan would fall in a single day. As the White Scars gathered at a hidden munitions cache, a lone figure emerged from the darkness. It was Shadow Captain Shrike of the Raven Guard, and he delivered a message to the alerted White Scars from his chapter master, Corvin Severax. The White Scars were to return to the capital and prepare to retreat off-world. A powerful Imperial fleet, including the Raven Guard battle barge Wings of Deliverance, stood ready to aid in the evacuation. Agralan could no longer be held against the Tau. The fall of Agralan. It was well indeed for the Imperium that Corvin Severax had such a shrewd tactical mind. Had he not acted so swiftly and decisively to organize a full-scale evacuation, the planet-wide Tau assault would have decimated the Imperium's fighting strength in the Lethesh sector. When the Tau attack came, it was so sudden and brutally efficient that many high cities fell within the first few hours of the mass assault. The defenses of every high city had been meticulously analyzed by orbital scans and advanced reconnaissance teams. The weaknesses of each of these strongholds had been discovered, and the appropriate cadres deployed to ensure their total destruction. Shadowsun developed a different plan of attack for each hive city, ensuring that if any defensive strategy proved effective, it would not work against Tau forces elsewhere. In Gorvus Hive, the Hydra batteries that protected the city from aerial assault were eliminated by optimized stealth groups. Within the hour, the defenses had been bombed to rubble by wave after wave of Paradox squadrons. Meanwhile, in Immortus Hive, 10 range support cadres concentrated their railgun fire to level a section of the outer wall. Hunter cadres by the dozen poured out of their devilfish transports to storm the breach, and soon the high city streets ran red with the blood of the slain. At the forefront of each and every assault strode the new XV-104 Riptides. Wherever these mighty battlesuits engaged the beleaguered Imperial defenders, they slaughtered them and shattered their bulwarks. Only the Imperial Knights seemed able to withstand them on the battlefield, and even then, 5 Knights were felled by Riptide wings during the battle for Agralan Prime. The battle for the capital hive saw the greatest concentration of both Imperial and Tau forces engage in the heaviest fighting of the war. It was here that Commander Shadowsun led her fire-strike assault cadre into the fray, urged on in person by Onvar and his ethereal council. Inspired by the legends in their midst, the Firecast fought all the harder. The defenders of Agram Prime had been bolstered overnight by the newly arrived Raven Guard 6th Company and the Acadian 724th Wardens under Colonel Jericho Voss. Corvin Severax himself directed the Hive City's defences, determined to see them hold long enough for Shrike and the White Scars to fight their way back into the city for extraction. There were moments of incredible skill and heroism on both sides. During the course of the battle, the marksmanship of Magog's rattling rifles accounted for no less than 30 crisis battlesuits. Meanwhile, the famous Tau Hammerhead commander, Longstrike, reaped a fearful tally of battle tanks before the city gates and crippled a pair of Imperial Knights. Beyond the southern walls of the capital, Strachan's Catachan jungle fighters engaged in savage ambush and counter-ambush against Kroot hunting packs amid the desiccated woodlands beyond the Hive walls. It was here that Shrike led the White Scars on their route towards the city. The arrival of the Space Marines and a pair of Hailstorm squadrons from the Hive City soon saw the Kroot mercenaries defeated. Having forged a clear path through the Tau lines, the Imperial forces retreated back towards the relative safety of the city. Just when it seemed that the Space Marines and Catachans would make it back to Agralan Prime, Shadow Sun sprung her trap. A simultaneous pincer assault comprising 4 counter-strike cadres and Shadow Sun's own Fire-Strike assault cadre slammed into both flanks of the Imperial column. Despite a ferocious counterattack from the White Scars and Raven Guard, driving the first wave of Tau attackers back, the arrival of a Riptide wing turned the tide back against them. Shadow Sun darted between the desperate firefights, picking off the Imperial transports with methodical efficiency. It was at that moment, just when all appeared lost, that Corvin Severax played his trump card. The explosive arrival of this new combatant was evidenced when a vast chain blade burst from the chest of a Riptide, before tearing the battlesuit apart in a welter of sparks. The Obsidian Knights had entered the fray. Acutely aware of the specialist skills of this fabled knight, Severax had sought out the relentless Tau killer and transported him to Agralan. The violence that ensued proved the chapter master wise, for the Obsidian Knights slaughtered the Tau forces with terrible purpose. Inspired by this veritable engine of death, the embattled Space Marines redoubled their efforts and hurled the Tau back. At the last, the Knights of House Terran were able to fight their way through to relieve the retreating Imperial host. There, the Knight Paladins stood sentinel, bombarding the Tau with their rapid-fire battle cannons, as the Catachans and Space Marines reached the Hive City at last. The Knights suffered for their brave rearguard action, the Tau broadsides, hammerheads, and Riptide battlesuits making them pay dearly. Only when the first of the Imperial transports were launched did Patriarch Tybalt grudgingly lead his few remaining knights back towards the awaiting Imperial dropships. With that final act, the Imperium withdrew from Agralan, leaving the planet in Tau hands. Shadow Sun's planet-wide assault had proven to be a tactical masterstroke. In a single day, the Imperial forces had been humbled, and every high city had been taken. Within hours of the Imperial fleet breaking orbit, work had already begun to settle this newest Tau-Sep world, which would be named Mugulath Bay. The Imperium regroups. After the defeat at Agralan, Corvin Severax held a council of war aboard his flagship, Wings of Deliverance. It was here that Patriarch Tybalt made a solemn gesture of sacrifice, offering up his own homeworld as a favourable battleground on which they could fight the Tau. After many long decisions, all were in agreement that the Imperial fleet would withdraw to nearby Voltores. If the Tau could be drawn into attacking this verdant night world, it could be defended more effectively than any other world in the sector. The key to the strategy was the fact that the planet's only populated area was centered around the mighty stronghold of House Terran, Furion Peak. If the Tau were to conquer Voltores, they would have to attack the fortress directly. The Imperial forces could thus muster their strength in a single location. The galactic location of Voltores had kept the planet largely isolated from the many wars fought over the millennia by the Imperium and the knights of the planet's ruling house. But in 980999 Millennium 41, that was all about to change. In the wake of her stunning victory at Agralan, Shadowsun led her Tau expeditionary fleet onwards to fresh conquests without delay, adhering to the sage axiom of her late mentor, Commander Puretide. The Devore system now lay open to the Tau, and Shadowsun's forces swept through the planets of the region in swift succession. Yet Shadowsun had her doubts. Ever in the back of her mind was what had become of the Imperial forces that had eluded her at Agralan. Though he knew she would never admit it, Onvar could sense Shadowsun's frustration and determined to ease her state of mind. So did the Ethereal Supreme grant Shadowsun sanction to leave and hunt down her quarry while the rest of the expeditionary force consolidated their conquest of the Dovar system. Not only would their destruction shatter Imperial resistance in the sector, but Onvar was confident that after fulfilling her quest, Shadowsun would return to him more hungry than ever to expand the Tau Empire and strike deeper into the heart of the Imperium. Setting forth with fully half of the Tau Coalition's military strength behind her, Shadowsun wasted no time in tracking down the whereabouts of the Imperial host, sending out surveillance drones in their thousands to seek her prey. It was not long before she had discovered their location, for Voltores was close, and the Imperial forces stationed there had made no effort to conceal their presence. Shadowsun gave the order to head for Voltores without hesitation. When the Tau fleet arrived at Voltores, Shadowsun was surprised to find the planet's orbit was not held against them. Despite system-wide scans revealing that an Imperial fleet was indeed present nearby, it soon became apparent that it had no intention of engaging the much larger Tau Armada. Cautious of the danger, but fully confident in the superior strength and number of ships under her command, Shadowsun chose to press on with the attack on Voltores. A few hours later, the Tau fleet was in position and ready to commence the invasion of the Night World. Corvin Severax had ordered the Imperial fleet to retreat before the Tau Armada, feigning weakness. He needed to ensure that Voltores was a suitably irresistible target to the pursuing Tau, who now had the perfect opportunity to seek revenge on the knights that had so vehemently rebuked their ambassadors and caused so much harm on Agralan. House Terran would not stand alone. Their stronghold of Furion Peak stood proud atop a rocky plateau that pierced the jungle canopy, and it was there that the Imperium would make its stand. With great effort, the White Scar Stormseer, Sudabe, had concealed the main fighting strength of the Raven Guard beneath a shadowy psychic mist. Meanwhile, the Catachans were carefully ensconced within the dense jungle surrounding Furion Peak. Even the dangerous predators that stalked amongst them held no fear for those born and raised on Catachan. The duty of bait went to the brave shock troops of the Cadian 724th, yet even they were heavily dug in before the great gates of Furion Peak. Within the stronghold itself waited the sharpest jaws of the trap. Khosaro Khan's Third Company and the full fighting strength of House Terran's knights. Shadowsun had carefully reviewed the force disposition arrayed against her on the planet's surface. All of the Imperial strength was concentrated in one location, around a solitary fortress. She was, however, well aware that the enemy formations were visible to the Armada's orbital scanners could not represent all of the Imperial forces that had escaped Agralan. This meant that any reserves were either stationed inside the enemy stronghold itself, or remained aboard their fleeing ships and planned to leave the planet to its fate. To Shadowsun's well-honed instincts, such a situation called for Montkar, the killing blow. she would launch a lightning assault to crush the exposed enemy with overwhelming force. Counter-strike cadres and rapid insertion forces would form a hard-hitting reserve, ready to react to any fresh enemy threats yet to be revealed. If she could conquer an entire Imperial hive world in a single day, what hope did one enemy fortress have? For the first time in her illustrious career, Shadowsun was sorely mistaken. Blinded by her determination to eliminate those who had previously eluded her, Shadowsun had fallen for the same strategy that had won her victories beyond counting. Lured into launching an all-out attack on the Imperial battle line, Shadowsun realized too late the sheer size and strength of the Imperial army lying in wait. The Tau cadres swept towards Furion Peak, preparing to smash the Imperial army aside with a single crushing blow. Shadowsun led from the front, embodying the tip of the spear that would deliver the killing blow. A series of distant illuminations was all the warning the first wave of Tau cadres received, before explosions suddenly bloomed amidst their lines. The heavy ordnance blasted apart armor, flesh and bone with equal impunity. Carefully concealed direct support batteries had been dug into the flanks of the stronghold's foothills, and they proceeded to bombard the onrushing Tau with increasing ferocity as they drew nearer. As soon as the first shells crashed down, the Catachans swarmed forth from the jungle thickets and began to pour fire into the flanks of the Tau advance. The disciplined Fire Tau warriors reacted swiftly to these multiple new threats, rallying around their mighty riptides and returning fire, seemingly impervious to the seismic explosions erupting in their midst. The battlesuits lay down salvos of missiles in an attempt to blunt the Imperial counterattack. Entire platoons of the guardsmen were torn apart by the lines of death stitched by heavy burst cannons. But the Raven Guard have ever been masters of the ambush, and they knew their craft well. They had anticipated such a response from the Tau. Indeed, they had counted on it. The artillery batteries began to refocus their aim, targeting their bombardments to land behind the main body of the Tau invasion force to cut off any lines of retreat. Moments later, shadowy forces began to emerge from within what the Tau had mistaken for thick morning mists. The Raven Guard had entered the fray, seemingly assailing the Tau forces from every direction. They swiftly surrounded pockets of Tau resistance, cutting them down before disappearing back into the mist once more. Amongst them strode Furion Peak's Counter-Strike Command, each Space Marine an indomitable champion of humanity. Without fear or hesitation, they sought out the deadly Riptide battlesuits and, with blade, claw and psychic energies, they struck them down. Shadowsun was caught in the thick of the fighting when the Space Marine commanders joined the attack. Even though her race's knowledge of Psychers was limited, she had encountered the Gwaelar's witches before, and was well aware of the threat they posed. Activating her XV-22 battlesuit's cloaking device, she blended into the mists and darted her way through the press towards the Stormseer. Scant heartbeats later, Sube'day was consumed by the superheated fury of Shadowsun's fusion blasters, and with this demise, the ghostly psychic mist that had shrouded much of the battlefield began to dissipate. As the air cleared, the full gravity of Shadowsun's predicament was revealed. She looked on in horror at the sight of yet more Imperial reinforcements, pouring forth from the gaping maw of Furion Peak's majestic gate came the White Scars, engines roaring as they sped forth to encircle the Tau army. Behind them marched the full might of House Terran, over 30 Imperial Knights, with Patriarch Tybalt and the Obsidian Knight at their head. The Cadian 724th emerged from their dugouts to lend their weight to the big Imperial push, each company supported by a steel phalanx tank squadron. Shadowsun knew that victory against such odds was nigh impossible, but resolved that she would try to save as many of her kin as possible. She relayed urgent instructions to her reserve cadres that were inbound aboard a wave of mantas. Rather than take the fight to the enemy below, they were to focus on driving them back from a number of key locations and buy the Tau ground forces time to retreat. In the meantime, she gave the order to fall back and regroup. Shadowsun turned her attention back to the battle just in time to save her life. Having carved his way through the press, Khosrau Khan was almost upon her, his oath to slay the Tau commander not forgotten. Were it not for the intervention of her loyal bodyguards, the Khan would undoubtedly have taken Shadowsun's head. As it was, the sacrifice of her kin enabled her to overcharge her battlesuit's shields just in time to divert the White Scar's blow. So did the Tau commander cheat death. Khosrau Khan's blade carved a furrow across her chest instead of severing her head. Shadowsun's reprieve came with the timely arrival of a rapid insurgent force dropping from above to rescue their sorely wounded commander. Khan was driven back by the overwhelming firepower of the elite crisis battlesuit teams before he could finish his prey. Despite the arrival of Tau reinforcements, it was too late for them to turn the tide. The Imperial ambush had been so swift that the Tau forces were assailed on every front within minutes of setting foot on Voltores. When word spread of the near-fatal injuries sustained by their supreme commander, the resolve of the Firecast broke. With their leader cast down and lacking the iron discipline of the Adeptus Astartes, the Tau suffered appalling casualties as they retreated from the Furium Peak. The Imperial Knights and Space Marines gave merciless chase, and only the formidable firepower of the Tau Mantas and Paradox squadrons prevented a total massacre. Many Tau gave their lives to ensure that Shadowsun was safely extracted from the war zone, a sacrifice she had not forgotten and had sworn to avenge. The Tau Armada returned to rejoin Onvar's expeditionary fleet, humbled by their disastrous defeat. Having learned much from her failure, Shadowsun swore before the Onvar to redouble her efforts, and now leads the Tau onwards with renewed zeal. End quote. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.